Week 7 of fantasy football is upon us. Today, we're going to be breaking down 4 buys and 3 sells. We're at about the halfway point of the fantasy football regular season. So we'll also have rest of season rankings in tier list format later today. If you guys want to obviously hit the subscribe button, make sure you're tuned in for that as well. But we're going to be breaking down some buys and sells. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so first guy we're going to kick things off with here is a guy that I've probably called the high-end wide receiver 2 more times than I've been alive, but Devonta Smith, wide receiver of the Philadelphia Eagles. He started out the season really hot. He had 2 really good games to start off week 1 and week 2. A big part of why Devonta Smith is a good buy low right now is because, honestly, the Eagles' offense has kind of just been lacking those big plays, lacking those long, touchdowns that Devonta Smith made famous last year when he finished as a top 12 wide receiver. But this week, going up against the Miami Dolphins, going up against the Washington Commanders 2 weeks from now, both of those defenses are exploitable, especially via the air, big plays, and those things could correct themselves for Devonta Smith. I really don't have anything negative to say about him outside of the fact that he's probably limited to like a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2, given the presence of A.J. Brown, given how productive he's been at commanding targets and getting yards and that kind of thing. But because of that presence of A.J. Brown, the big plays will eventually come. That's what opens up the offense for Devonta Smith. And you guys can see his peripherals are still fine, right? 23% target share. 72% of his targets are catchable. You just haven't seen him connect for those big plays downfield. And right now, if you could trade away DK Metcalf or Joe Mixon or, this Tyler Lockett and Roschon Johnson deal for Devonta Smith, George Pickens, another good potential sell high candidate with Deontay Johnson coming back. Amari Cooper and Nico Collins both have had some productive weeks in the last couple games. I think Devonta Smith is a guy that I would rather have over all of the names that I just mentioned.
Yeah, and he's the type of guy where because he's playing in a good offense, because he's got, a big name, Devonta Smith, because he's playing with Jalen Hurts, he's a type of player that you could easily see appreciate in value within a couple weeks if he has a couple big performances. Like if he goes out there and he's the wide receiver 5 this week going up against Miami in a high shootout, that in 2 weeks' time, if you then want to flip Devonta Smith, once he's coming off that high, he's going to hold a lot of market value to be able to tier up to one of those other wide receivers. So he's the perfect leverage piece. I kind of mentioned that last week when it came to James Cook, where we kind of know what his role is. He's going to be a high-end wide receiver 2, but he's going to have those spike weeks, those volatile weeks on a week-to-week basis. When people are valuing him as a wide receiver 1, that's when you sell him. When people are valuing him more so as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3, which they are right now, that's when you want to be buying. There's a lot of market opportunities to be able to pick up some profit on guys like Devonta Smith.
Yeah, and I think part of the narrative that's around the Eagles right now, it's like, oh, they lost Shane Steichen. The offense doesn't look the same as it was last year. That kind of maybe presents a buying window for the Philadelphia Eagles in general, but especially with Devonta Smith, because I'm for one, not really worried about this Eagles offense. Yeah, maybe it's not quite as good as it was last year, but generally speaking, it's still a top 5 to 10 offense at the very least in the NFL, if not one of the top 3 to 5 offenses. So Devonta Smith, definitely a guy that I'm going to be sending out some offers for. Who do you have up here as a guy that you're sending out some offers for?
Very similar in the terms of playing in a good offense, very talented player. The only thing is that my guy, I think, has a legitimate top 5 ceiling in fantasy football. Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers. And the reason why he is a big buy right now is because he's had 2 bad weeks back-to-back. One in that blowout against my beloved Dallas Cowboys. The game script wasn't really working for them. They were up big at halftime, ended up going up big in the third quarter. Didn't really need to stretch the ball down the field, so that explains that. And this week, honest to God, just looks like an outlier for the 49ers. I mean, Brock Purdy played his worst game as a pro. 49ers were really stumped by, in my opinion, the best defense in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns. I don't think that's translatable moving forward. Aiyuk is still the number 2 graded wide receiver on PFF. He's still commanding a 31% seasonal target share. And when you actually put his peripherals up to some of the best performing fantasy wide receivers in fantasy this year, it's pretty mind-boggling because I got this comparison right now next to A.J. Brown and Keenan Allen, and you see the peripherals across the board. Targets per run, targets, ADOT, air yards, third and fourth down targets, play action targets, all favor Brandon Aiyuk. Him commanding this share of that, vaunted San Francisco passing attack is very encouraging to say the least. He's a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 on a baseline right now. And yet because of these 2 down weeks, I think he could be had closer to, fringe top 20 level prices. The 49ers aren't going to play the Browns every week. And not to mention, I think an underrated factor is with Christian McCaffrey banged up, with Deebo Samuel banged up, he is by far their number 1 weapon. And for the short-term future, I think he could be a legitimate top 5 guy, not even mentioning that if he keeps this up across the season, I think he has that top 5 level ceiling. Anytime I can get, like I said, 31% of the targets in the Shanahan offense at a discount, I'm absolutely doing it. And some of these deals, like I said, are absolute discounts. Brandon Aiyuk and Kyle Pitts for Darren Waller and Jakobi Meyers. Give me Brandon Aiyuk and Kyle Pitts there. Brandon Aiyuk, Pat Fryermuth, Chris Olave for Hopkins, Montgomery, Gabe Davis, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. I don't know how, applicable this is now that David Montgomery is dealing with the injury, but of course I would favor the Brandon Aiyuk side here. Brandon Aiyuk straight up for Brian Robinson. Easy deal. This one's a little bit closer. Brandon Aiyuk for Kenneth Walker. I think this really just depends on the structure of your team. If you have a bunch of running backs, you want to offload one for a high-end wide receiver with some upside, I don't mind making this type of move for Brandon Aiyuk. And then these final two deals, Brandon Aiyuk for Nico Collins and Brian Robinson. Very nice opportunity to consolidate here. I don't mind going for Brandon Aiyuk. And then finally, Brandon Aiyuk and Tyler Higbee for DeAndre Hopkins and Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet, Tyler Higbee, I really don't care. They are non-needle movers at tight end, and Brandon Aiyuk, in my opinion, is a massive upgrade over DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of a buy high with Brandon Aiyuk right now because I'm sure the manager who has Brandon Aiyuk is probably well aware that Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey are injured. But like you kind of said there, the reasonable outcome, like 31% target share in a top 5 offense, that's top 5 wide receiver upside, right? And especially the way that the 49ers offense is, outlined where it's, everybody's competing for these like short, close to the line of scrimmage targets with Deebo Samuel, with Christian McCaffrey, and with George Kittle. But the main downfield guy is Brandon Aiyuk. Like you mentioned, all the air yards pretty much go into him. And he's the one operating like his true natural X receiver position. And like you said, second highest graded receiver on PFF, over a 3.5 yards per hour. He's just playing at such a high level right now that it's really hard to not go after him. I will say, as a Brandon Aiyuk manager, I'm well aware of this and I don't want to trade this guy away. But if your league mates are a little bit stupider, don't really understand his target share and that kind of thing, maybe you can get him for a decent discount. And I would say another one of these buys that I'm going to talk about right now is going to really require some dumb league mates, or some buffoon league mates, as we like to say around here. Bijan Robinson, running back of the Atlanta Falcons. The way that you're going to get a discount on Bijan Robinson is, number one, he's been under 14 PPR points per game in 3 of his last 4 starts. So we know rookies tend to get their shit together as the season goes along and they get more acclimated to the NFL. And we've already seen the flashes of the talent with Bijan Robinson. We know this guy's already one of the best running backs in the league. We just haven't quite seen the fantasy production follow on a week-to-week basis consistently over the course of the season. He has Carolina twice and Indianapolis in the fantasy football playoffs. And as we start to approach the, trade deadline, that's going to be something that you 6-0 guys, 5-1 guys, 4-2 guys want to think about, is some of these playoff schedules. And I think right now you can use a running back like Kenneth Walker, Isaiah Pacheco, maybe David Montgomery once he comes back from injury, Josh Jacobs, Raheem Mostert, and go out and try and get Bijan Robinson on the low. You might not be able to get them straight up for those guys, but you maybe can package Bijan Robinson and, a tight end that you have sitting on your bench to a team that needs a tight end, or maybe a wide receiver 3 type like Chris Godwin or Tyler Lockett or something like that. Go up and get Bijan Robinson, get yourself a potential league winner, because the workload that this guy is getting is comparable, as you guys can see, to the likes of Austin Eckler and Travis Etienne and Kenneth Walker, some of the better workloads in the league, especially as a pass catcher. He's getting everything under the sun from a route standpoint, from a target share standpoint, long down and distance, 2-minute drill snaps. I'm not really resigned to the fact that Desmond Ritter's suddenly going to get better. I think he's not a good quarterback. And I think unless we get Taylor Heineke, there's not going to be much that changes. But what I will think is going to get better is Bijan Robinson's involvement and centerpiece around the entire offense. Drake London's playing well, Kyle Pitts is playing well, and Bijan is playing well. More red zone opportunities equals more fantasy production for him.
Yeah, I mean, the Falcons offense, for the most part, like on paper, like we know it's very consolidated. Kyle Pitts is going to do his thing. Drake London is going to do his thing. But at the end of the day, Bijan Robinson is the engine of this offense. And I understand people are a little bit concerned because he split some snaps with Tyler Algier. I don't mind him splitting snaps with Tyler Algier. Tyler Algier, you can take the dirty carries. You're a big, thumping, tone-setting running back. You run a run between the tackles. Go ahead. If I'm getting this level of receiving usage and clean touches from Bijan Robinson, I want that on my fantasy team. And like you mentioned, he's still a rookie. We know that he's got the talent. And once we see that workload even take up to the next step, which I do believe it will, this guy can break fantasy.
Yeah, and it feels good buying a 21-year-old running back with very minimal tread on the tires, as opposed to like buying low on Austin Eckler, for example, who, is an older running back and has already dealt with injuries so far this year. I think it just helps you sleep at night a little bit easier. And if you can sell, let's say an elite quarterback who haven't been super elite. Maybe you picked up somebody off of the waiver wire who's performing really well, and you have Jalen Hurts on your team, and you could sell him for Bijan Robinson, or you could sell Patrick Mahomes for Bijan Robinson, like you guys can see in some of these deals. Bijan Robinson was also acquired for Jahmyr Gibbs straight up. Cooper Kupp was sold for Bijan and Mike Evans. Again, that's probably a pretty even deal, but I do like the Bijan side there if you need some depth. Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua for Bijan and Calvin Ridley. Again, probably a fair deal, but I do like the Bijan side there if you need a running back. And then also like some of these deals here, Mixon and Ford for Bijan, that's free cash. Jerome Ford and Jordan Addison, also free cash. And then Nacua and Ramondre Stevenson, also a good time to get out on a guy like Ramondre Stevenson, who'd be kind of like an honorable mention, sell high in this video. So Bijan, he's my RB3 rest of the season, maybe even my RB2. I have Austin Eckler slightly ahead of him, but this is a guy that I really believe in to get better as the season goes along. Even if we get below average quarterback play from Desmond Ridder, I have faith that he's the centerpiece of this offense. The receiving work and the big plays and the talent level that I've seen from him so far is what's going to get him to that 18 to 20 PPR point per game performances that I know he's going to have towards the season.
Yeah, and last piece of input when it comes to Bijan Robinson, you kind of mentioned the running back landscape as a whole right now is very, up and down. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey dealing with the injury. Austin Eckler did deal with an injury and came back to a bad performance against the Cowboys. Like, can you say for certain that you know exactly what's going to be going on at the running back landscape? Like, for those of you that are really worried about Bijan Robinson right now, who in the running back landscape really gives you more, comfortability at this current point?
No, there's not many guys. Like, maybe you want to lean towards like the safe workload of some of these guys, but at the same time, like, Travis Etienne and Kenneth Walker, like those guys have, they're all capable of getting injured themselves and that kind of thing. Like it's tough with the running back landscape. And I think getting a really young running back who's actually being used in a way that's not going to have him see a lot of those dirty carries where he could get banged up or whatever is something that gives me a lot of confidence. And, knock on wood, nothing happens to any of these running backs. But I will say, when I talk about risk mitigation, a guy like Bijan makes a lot of sense. So this one, a little bit more risky, obviously, because he is coming off of an injury and, the offense doesn't look really good, especially with their upcoming schedule as well. But Jonathan Taylor is somebody that you're buying on, and I'm kind of in full agreement. If you didn't take him, I probably would have.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually grouped the Colts backfield as my buy and my sell. Jonathan Taylor being the buy, Zach Moss being the sell. And some of you might be wondering, especially if are more casual fantasy football players, well, why is that? Zach Moss outperformed him. Zach Moss is, the RB5 on the season. Like, why would I sell Zach Moss when Jonathan Taylor has been objectively worse to start this year? I understand you have concerns, but at the same time, it's clear to me that while it was a 50-50 committee for the most part this past week, Jonathan Taylor is going to be scaled up going forward. He only saw 20% of the snaps in his first game back. That already jumped up to nearly 50%. And as we know with Jonathan Taylor, I think he's one of the top 5 or so talents in the NFL at the running back position. It's clear that they want him to be that guy. 3-year, $42 million extension deal that he just signed this season. Literally while he was on the IR when he wasn't playing games, they decided to give him $14 million per year to bring him back for the long term with this team. And the reason why I'm high on him is that this offense has been able to run the ball this year. This was the main point why I was a little bit skeptical in the offseason that the offensive line wasn't playing as well. Jonathan Taylor himself wasn't as efficient, but this offensive line is playing at a complete different level than it was last year. 5th graded offensive line in terms of run block rate, according to PFF, which is a huge bounce back, like I said, from what JT saw last year from his offensive line. And the innovative scheme that we're getting from Shane Steichen has been the reason why this Colts run game has been so good. If you actually look at the actual overall rushing grade, they are a bottom 3 rushing grade team, meaning that Zach Moss, he hasn't been doing it on his own. The offensive line is creating holes. The offensive line is the reason why he's been able to see success in fantasy football. And I do think, like I said, Jonathan Taylor is going to reclaim this workload within the next couple of weeks. And I think within a couple of weeks, thinking about this discussion in hindsight is going to kind of seem foolish to a certain degree that we were even debating Zach Moss versus Jonathan Taylor. Like, that is a real discussion in some leagues because of how Zach Moss has looked. Zach Moss, like I said, he still holds significant trade value. Like some of these trades I found, I was honestly shocked. I thought about leaving Zach Moss off of this video because I didn't think people were actively buying him, but some of these deals, man, like you're seeing right now, you can flip Zach Moss for Michael Thomas straight up rest of the season. You can flip it for Christian Watson rest of the season. You can flip it for Deebo Samuel rest of the season. All guys I would much prefer over Zach Moss. I think, like I said, Jonathan Taylor is going to be the main guy here, and you shouldn't be left holding the bag if you have Zach Moss. Instead, go buy Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor, some of these deals that he's going for right now are downright baffling. Jonathan Taylor and Joe Mixon. I don't like Joe Mixon, but you can get Jonathan Taylor plus for Sam Laporta. If you can do that, absolutely do it. You can get Jonathan Taylor for Adam Thielen and Alexander Madison. You should be doing it. DeAndre Hopkins and Brandon Aiyuk, who I love Brandon Aiyuk, but if you tell me you can move Brandon Aiyuk and DeAndre Hopkins for Austin Eckler and Jonathan Taylor, you have to be doing that because that can downright win your league. And then finally, this last deal, I love Austin Eckler, but Jonathan Taylor and DK Metcalf side all day, every day here.
Yeah, I mean, the Thielen and Madison deal probably make the most sense in terms of like what people are going to be looking at. Get yourself an overperforming wide receiver. Not that Adam Thielen and Jakobi Meyers and some of these guys we're going to talk about are bad options. They're fine options, but use them plus a guy like Madison or plus a guy, whatever, Rashad White, somebody like that, and go after Jonathan Taylor. Get yourself a needle mover at running back. Get yourself, because if you have a really good roster, you've probably not even been playing Adam Thielen these past couple weeks because you're like, he's Adam Thielen. I already have, these 3 wide receivers in my lineup that are better projections or have higher ceilings or whatever the case is. And you're probably getting annoyed that Adam Thielen keeps going off on your bench, or maybe you just want to upgrade because you recognize that maybe he's overvalued on the market right now. So yeah, definitely makes sense. Jonathan Taylor, a guy that I've been trying to buy really for the last couple weeks, and I'm going to continue to do so, even though he has a bad matchup this week, and that might sway some of your league mates away from keeping him too. Because I remember I tried to buy him yesterday, and one of my league mates was like, "Oh, damn, he plays Cleveland this week." Like, people are nervous about Jonathan Taylor. So even though I don't think my league is dumb enough to think that Zach Moss is going to be a major part of this backfield the entire season, they're just nervous about Taylor in general. And Zach Moss, the schedule, the offense without Richardson, it all kind of plays into the same factor that, Jonathan Taylor might not be as good as some people are thinking. And I think it's going to be quite the opposite. I think this Colts game that we saw this past week, Minshew will play better if Taylor is playing well. And we're going to see the offense kind of move the ball. Downs, of course, is looking pretty decent as a slot receiver. But I can close this video out here with my sell, which is Jakobi Meyers, who I just mentioned. I mean, we talked about Adam Thielen last week. I also think Alvin Kamara kind of fits into the discussion as well. He's a fine wide receiver 2-3 option, maybe even a back-end wide receiver 2 rest of the season. But in my opinion, Jakobi Meyers is his spike in production is going to cause a lot of people to overvalue him. It's worth seeing what you can get, right? You might be able to get some of the guys we talked about in this video straight up for Jakobi Meyers. Devonta Smith, Brandon Aiyuk, maybe a small piece gets you to Jonathan Taylor. Maybe get Chris Olave or Calvin Ridley straight up for Jakobi Meyers. And like I said, Meyers plus maybe can get you to a league winner like Bijan Robinson or get you to somebody like that. If you have Jakobi Meyers and Isaiah Pacheco on your lineup right now, you can probably get up to Bijan Robinson or Jonathan Taylor with those 2 guys. And I'm absolutely willing to do that because, like I said, Jakobi Meyers by no means a must sell. He's a very solid option. He's got like a 27% target share on the year, and he's actually outscoring Devontae Adams. But I don't think that's going to continue. I think we're talking about a guy that's more of a back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. He's going to come back down to earth, especially with Garoppolo potentially dealing with an injury these next couple weeks. So with Jakobi Meyers, definitely see what you can get for him. Again, not a must sell, but see what he's available for on your open market. See what you can tier up to.
100%. And like we kind of mentioned with Adam Thielen last week, it's very similar. Like, I'm not discrediting these guys. I have, very, very high credits to them rest of the season. Adam Thielen, top 20 option. Jakobi Meyers, a fringe top 25 wide receiver for me. But given that they've outperformed their standing so far, it's worth seeing if you can go after needle moving assets. Like, you probably could have moved last week Adam Thielen plus a small week for CeeDee Lamb going into that game against the Chargers. You could move it, like, just scan the field, see who's available. Like, who are the top end wide receivers that you can target using Jakobi Meyers? Maybe add a bench piece, maybe add, and if you have an Alexander Madison type, maybe you add, wide receiver 4 type. If you can package that to Jakobi Meyers and go after, I don't know, Chris Olave or Calvin Ridley or something like that, it's worth monitoring.
Yeah, absolutely. So as always, too, make sure to target the 0-6, the 1-5, and the 2-4 teams. Those guys are going to be motivated to make a move. And of course, if you guys want access to our rest of season rankings to know who to trade for, again, I will be doing a rest of season rankings tier list later today. So stay tuned for that video. But yeah, if you want access to our rest of season rankings, you know how to get them. Those will be linked down below in the pinned comment. Flockfantasy.com/FSE. A lot of cool tools and a lot of cool advancements coming over there. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, and comment any of your trade questions down below. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.